Germany. Land of bratwurst and dictatorship? Hold on to your lederhosen, folks, because things are about to get real. We're diving deep into the heart of Europe, into a nation known for its beer, its cars, and its, complicated history. That's right, we're talking about Germany. But this isn't your Oma's Germany of charming villages and cuckoo clocks. We're here to ask the tough questions. Does Germany have a dark side? Is it possible that beneath the surface of this seemingly well-oiled democratic machine, there are gears grinding, levers being pulled, and a whiff of authoritarianism in the air? It sounds crazy, right? But stay with us. We're going full Sherlock Holmes on this one, magnifying glass and all. Because when it comes to democracy, we can't afford to take anything for granted. We're talking about a country that went from a devastating world war to an economic powerhouse. But with great power comes great responsibility and maybe, just maybe, a little temptation to, shall we say, bend the rules. So buckle up, Buttercup, because we're about to dissect the German political system like a frog in biology class. Don't worry, no actual frogs were harmed in the making of this essay. Junta. Is Germany packing heat now? Let's get one thing straight. When we hear the word junta, our minds don't exactly jump to images of lederhosen and Oktoberfest. We're talking military coups, dictators in sunglasses, and a whole lot of you can't do that vibes. But here's the thing, authoritarianism isn't always a jackbooted thug kicking down your door. Sometimes it's a slow burn, a creeping vine that slowly chokes out the sunlight of democracy. So, while Germany might not be run by a bunch of generals with bad haircuts, at least not yet, that doesn't mean we can just give them a free pass. We need to look beyond the surface, past the beer gardens and the BMWs, and ask ourselves, is there a hint of junta in Germany's DNA? Are there subtle signs of power being consolidated, of dissent being silenced, of the political system becoming less responsive to the will of the people? We're not saying Germany is a full-blown dictatorship, but is it possible they're taking a few pages out of the junta playbook? It's a question worth asking, even if it makes us reach for another stein of beer to calm our nerves. Democracy. Germany's report card needs some work. Okay, so maybe junta is a bit strong. Germany isn't exactly holding elections at gunpoint, that we know of. But that doesn't mean their democracy is a pristine, perfect snowflake. Even the most well-intentioned systems can have cracks, and those cracks can hide some pretty shady stuff. Think of it like this. Democracy is like a car. Germany's driving a pretty sweet ride, a sleek Mercedes with all the bells and whistles. But even the nicest car needs regular maintenance. You've got to change the oil, rotate the tires, and occasionally give it a good wash. Otherwise, things start to break down, and you end up stranded on the side of the road with a busted axle and a face full of shame. So, what's the equivalent of a busted axle in a democracy? Well, it could be a bunch of things, laws that disproportionately benefit the wealthy and powerful, institutions that are resistant to change, or a political culture that discourages dissent and critical thinking. Germany might not be failing its democracy exam, but it's definitely time for a progress report. And maybe a parent-teacher conference wouldn't hurt either. Linz and Habermas walk into a bar in Berlin. Now let's bring in the big guns, the intellectual heavyweights who can help us make sense of all this. Imagine political philosophers Jürgen Habermas and Juan Linz bellying up to a bar in Berlin, arguing about the state of German democracy. Habermas, the optimistic one, would probably argue that Germany's got a pretty good thing going. Sure, there are flaws, but the system is fundamentally sound. He'd point to the free press, the independent judiciary, and the robust civil society as signs that German democracy is alive and well. Linz, on the other hand, would probably be a bit more skeptical. He'd be the one squinting at the beer menu, muttering about erosion of democratic norms and the dangers of democratic backsliding. He'd argue that even seemingly stable democracies can be vulnerable to authoritarian creep, especially when economic inequality is high and trust in institutions is low. So who's right? Well, like most things in life, the answer is probably somewhere in the messy middle. Germany isn't a perfect democracy, but it's not a dictatorship either. The real question is Germany moving closer to the Habermasian ideal of a vibrant, deliberative democracy, or is it slipping towards the Lindsaysian nightmare of authoritarianism? All right, time to put on our lab coats and get down to business. We're going full-on forensic accountant on Germany's political system, examining every law, every program, and every court ruling for signs of authoritarian shenanigans. This is where things get real wonky, but trust us, it's important. Because laws aren't just words on paper, they're the rules by which a society is governed. And if those rules are rigged in favor of the powerful, if they silence dissent or limit individual freedoms, then we've got a problem. We're talking about things like campaign finance laws, protest regulations, and media ownership rules. Are these laws designed to promote fairness and transparency, or are they being used to stifle opposition and consolidate power? We're also going to be looking at the courts. Are they truly independent, or are they beholden to political interests? Okay, we've heard from the philosophers. Now let's talk to the people who live and breathe German politics. The journalists, the academics, the activists, the politicians themselves. We're talking to the people who aren't afraid to speak truth to power, even if it means their funding gets cut or they get uninvited from the next embassy party. We want to know, are there any alarm bells ringing in Germany? Are there whispers of corruption, of undue influence, of the erosion of democratic norms? We're not talking about conspiracy theories here, but about the kind of informed, nuanced analysis that can only come from people who've spent years, even decades, studying a particular system. We'll be talking to constitutional law experts, investigative journalists, and human rights advocates. We'll be asking them the tough questions. Are there any laws or policies that raise red flags? Are there any institutions that seem particularly vulnerable to authoritarian influence? And most importantly, what can be done to address these concerns? No country exists in a vacuum, not even one as awesome as Germany. So let's zoom out for a second and see how Germany stacks up against other countries. We're talking about a good old-fashioned democracy showdown, comparing and contrasting Germany's political system with those of other nations. We'll look at countries that are generally considered to be healthy democracies, as well as those that are, shall we say, a little less democratic. We'll be looking at things like freedom of the press, electoral integrity, and the rule of law. By comparing Germany to other countries, we can get a better sense of where it stands on the global democracy spectrum. Is Germany a shining beacon of democratic values, or is it starting to blend in with the authoritarian crowd? This comparative perspective will help us understand the challenges and opportunities facing German democracy in the 21st century. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, the thing that can make even the most robust democracy crumble like a stale pretzel: corruption. Because corruption is like a virus. It can infect even the healthiest of systems, eating away at trust, undermining institutions, and ultimately destroying the very fabric of society. We'll be digging deep into Germany's underbelly, looking for signs of shady dealings, backroom deals, and politicians who seem to have a knack for turning taxpayer money into personal fortunes. We'll be looking at things like lobbying, campaign finance, and government contracts. Are there adequate safeguards in place to prevent conflicts of interest? Are there mechanisms for holding corrupt officials accountable? And perhaps most importantly, is there a culture of transparency and accountability in German politics? Or is corruption tolerated, even celebrated? So what does it all mean? Is Germany on the verge of becoming an authoritarian state? Probably not. But that doesn't mean we can just sit back and relax either. Democracy is a precious and fragile thing, and it requires constant vigilance and upkeep. Germany, with its history and its position in the world, has a special responsibility to be a champion for democratic values. The choices Germany makes in the coming years will have a ripple effect across Europe and beyond. This isn't just about Germany, it's about the future of democracy itself. In a world facing rising authoritarianism, climate change and economic inequality, we need Germany to be a force for good, to stand up for the values of freedom, justice and human rights. No pressure, Germany, but the world is watching.